Hello, everyone, and welcome to our regular press briefing on COVID-19 medicines and vaccines. This is Monica Benstedt in Amsterdam. It's great to see so many of you despite the last-minute change in timing. Thanks so much for bearing with us. It's my pleasure to present our panel today. We have with us Dr. Marco Cavalieri, the head of Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy and chair of EMA's Emergency Task Force, or ETF. Dr. Cavalieri will be answering any questions on the development and regulation of medicines and vaccines against COVID-19, so other medicines used in public health emergencies. Then we have Dr. Georgi Genov, the head of pharmacovigilance. Dr. Genov's field of expertise is the safety of medicines, and he's happy to respond to any questions in this field. And then it's also a great pleasure for me to introduce our new Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Steffen Tierstrup, who is joining us for the first time, and he will also be very happy to take any questions. As usual, Dr. Cavalieri will start off with an update on recent developments for COVID-19 vaccines and medicines. He will also give an overview of the progress made in relation to vaccines on monkeypox in relation to the outbreak in multiple countries in the EU and worldwide. After Dr. Cavalieri's update, we will open the floor for your questions. Few technical details before we start. Your microphones are presently disabled. During the Q&A session, we will unmute you, and when you take the floor to ask your questions, you can just proceed. The briefing is live broadcast via YouTube, Twitter, and Europe by satellite, and the footage can be used free of charge. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Cavalieri for his update. Marco, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our COVID-19 press briefing. I will start by providing an update of the latest developments on COVID-19 vaccines. First of all, we are seeing a new wave of COVID-19 cases in many member states across Europe. The spread of the infections is driven by the SARS-CoV-2 Omicron variants BA4 and BA5, which are highly transmissible, as you know. Based on current projections, BA4 and BA5 are expected to become dominant across European countries, likely completely replacing all other variants by end of July. Although there is no evidence of increased infection severity of BA4 and BA5 compared to previous Omicron subvariants, the increase in transmission among older age groups is starting to translate into severe disease. In this context, it is important to note that the authorized COVID-19 vaccines continue to offer good protection against hospitalization, severe disease, and death. Overall, we are in a much better position than we were in the previous waves of infection, given the higher proportion of vaccinated individuals in the EU. Improving vaccine uptakes of those yet to receive their primary course and first booster dose remains a priority, especially for vulnerable groups. Given the current situation, I would like to highlight a joint recommendation that EMA and ECDC adopted earlier this year in April. Our advice was that people over 80 years of age should get a second booster shot with the authorized messenger RNA vaccines. We also said at that time that if we see a significant resurgence of infection, as we do now, by the way, people between 60 and 79 years of old and medically vulnerable persons of any age should receive a second booster dose. As this new wave is unfolding over the EU, it is essential to maintain protection of vulnerable groups and avoid any postponement of vaccination. Now, let me start by giving an update on recent developments concerning adapted vaccines in view of plans for a broader rollout of vaccination campaigns in the autumn. Last week, EMA and the FDA co-chaired a workshop held under the umbrella of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, also called ICMRA, with other international regulators and the WHO about what we know so far in relation to the breadth of protection offered by different COVID-19 vaccines, in particular against currently circulating Omicron variants of concern. There, we had some alignment on key principles to support the adaptation of COVID-19 vaccines to better match Omicron variants of concern. However, current evidence is still evolving, and the situation is actually also very dynamic. What we have seen recently is that new variants can emerge rapidly and replace the currently circulating one after short-lived waves. And therefore, it is not possible to predict with any certainty which variants will be predominant in the autumn. ICMRA agreed first and foremost that the authorized COVID-19 vaccines continue to offer protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and death caused by COVID-19. We encourage their use when available, both as primary series as booster dose. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this update, this is really important. Preliminary data from clinical trials indicate that adaptive messenger RNA vaccines, which incorporates an Omicron variant strain, can increase and extend protection when used as a booster. Bivalent messenger RNA vaccines, which combine two strains of SARS-CoV-2, one of which is an Omicron strain and the other the original one strain, appear to offer an even wider immune response. Regarding the vaccines targeting the Omicron strains, there are currently two major options being considered by developers. One is to include a BA.1 subvariant, the other is to include a BA.4/5 strain, as the spike protein is identical in BA.4 and BA.5, so that's why we call it BA.4/5. Bivalent vaccines could be considered initially for use as boosters. Their use for primary vaccination might be supported in the future when further data will become available. Vaccines which include other variants, for example, a beta variant, might also be considered for use as boosters if the clinical trial data demonstrate an adequate level of neutralization against Omicron and other variants of concern. Overall, we expect to potentially have several vaccines to include in our vaccines armamentarium with an assortment of different compositions and platform technologies, and this is welcome. So, what is the EMA doing in terms of adaptive vaccines? EMA's role as regulator is to assess data for the updated vaccines as they come through and determine whether they are safe and effective and manufactured to the quality standard that we expect in order to determine whether they can be approved in the EU. We are already evaluating initial data from messenger RNA vaccines that have been submitted to us for review. Moderna has submitted immunogenicity and manufacturing data on a bivalent version of Spikevax that produces spike proteins from both the original one strain of coronavirus and the first Omicron variant BA.1. Pfizer-BioNTech is developing also an Omicron BA.1 vaccine, either as monovalent or bivalent in combination also with the one original strain. Presently, they have submitted manufacturing data, but are expected to shortly submit data on the immune response generated by both their candidates in clinical trials. They are also working on a candidate vaccines including BA.4/5 instead of BA.1. We are also in close contact with manufacturers of vaccines based on platforms other than messenger RNA, especially adjuvantive protein vaccines. They are also working on updating compositions, and we follow their progress closely in view of possible future applications. We remain open to consider different options in terms of actual vaccines composition. It is encouraging anyway to see that there are several developments ongoing, and our recommendations for authorization will rely on the assessment of any available non-clinical, clinical, and epidemiological data. In any case, as we cannot predict how the virus will evolve and what new variants of concern will emerge, the choice of vaccine composition will depend on the breadth of immunity achieved against variants of concerns, especially against the most recent and currently circulated variants. We are currently working towards the possible approval of adaptive vaccines in September. We are in close interaction also with the ECDC, the European Commission, and the European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, which is called HERA, and the public health authorities in the member states to work out the best approaches to vaccination in the EU to deal with potential new waves of infection. To what extent clinical data will have to be submitted to support an approval of updated vaccine is currently under discussion. At this stage, the evidence is still being collected from the ongoing clinical trials with investigational Omicron vaccines. We need to carefully review all emerging clinical and non-clinical data to better understand what impact the changes in the composition of the vaccines have on the clinical performance. We might be able to move towards a framework which is similar to influenza vaccines, which does not require submission of clinical data before approval of the annual update vaccine. Discussions among our experts are still ongoing, and direction of travel will depend on the strength of the data we receive. In any case, we will need to have evidence from the real world after approval to understand the impact that updated vaccines have on protecting people from infection and severe disease in the autumn and winter, and how long the boost will last. Therefore, effectiveness studies with adaptive vaccines are needed to determine the actual level of protection conferred from infection, hospitalization, and death in real-life conditions. Since our last press briefing, EMA has recommended marketing authorization to a new COVID-19 vaccine from Valneva. This vaccine has been authorized for use in primary vaccination of people from 18 to 50 years of age. The CHMP also recommended extension of indication for the COVID-19 vaccine Nuvaxovid. It can now be used for primary vaccination for anybody from 12 years of age. Altogether, we now have 6 COVID-19 vaccines approved in the EU. There is extensive evidence on the efficacy and safety of these vaccines. They are readily available and can be used when needed. Assessment of other vaccines such as the Ypres vaccine and the Sanofi Pasteur Vipreftin vaccines are also progressing. Even if this month we don't have new updates about COVID-19 treatments, they are still considered extremely important in complementing the vaccines and in the context of the next possible wave. The timely use of antivirals can be effective in preventing disease progression to severe COVID-19 in vulnerable people, whether vaccinated or not. It is, however, important to consider candidates that retain antiviral activity against the currently circulating strains. I would also like to give you an update on important scientific work to increase our understanding of the mechanism behind the thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. I'm sure you remember. This is the extremely rare side effect that occurs in some people who had received adenovirus-based COVID-19 vaccines from AstraZeneca and Janssen. Last week, the EMA hosted a virtual workshop with academics, international regulators, and marketing authorization holders of the 2 approved adenovirus-based COVID-19 vaccines in the EU, with the objective of defining current knowledge and next steps in terms of research. It has been reiterated that the presence of specific antibodies against the platelet factor 4 is a crucial feature of TTS after vaccination. These antibodies can activate platelets, which would lead to a downstream cascade of events resulting in blood clots and low platelet counts. Available studies have also explored the way in which the platelet release protein interacts with the adenovector and reviewed data that would suggest that the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus would not play a primary role in these events. We agreed that despite the tremendous amount of scientific work done so far, aspects such as genetic factor predisposing to TTS require additional investigation to better delineate who could be at risk and based on the primary immunological mechanism. Concern was raised about the level of reporting in low and medium income countries. We emphasized the need to improve surveillance activities globally, for example, by supporting the creation of surveillance networks able to perform more sophisticated laboratory analysis that would be needed for diagnosing TTS. Any learnings we get about the mechanisms underpinning these side effects will be important for increasing predictability of vaccine safety in this regard. Finally, I will share some updates about the monkeypox disease in the EU. As you know, monkeypox is a rare disease caused by the monkeypox virus, which is an orthopox virus. Monkeypox can spread from wild animals to humans and between people in close contact. The current multi-country outbreak is the first one reported in people with no links to endemic areas in Africa. EMA's Human Medicine Committee, the CHMP, is now reviewing data to extend the use of the smallpox vaccine called Imvanex for monkeypox. Imvanex is authorized in the EU to prevent smallpox in adults. It is considered a relevant and effective vaccine also for monkeypox, based on our knowledge from animal experiments and similarity with the smallpox virus. However, currently the supplies of Imvanex are very limited in the European Union. Imvanex is also marketed as Jynneos in the United States, where it is authorized to prevent both monkeypox and smallpox. While we are fast-tracking the extension of indication of Imvanex, the EU version of the vaccine, we have given a positive recommendation on the use of the imported vaccine for emergency use as a temporary measure. This will allow member states to vaccinate at-risk groups already now. The EMA Emergency Task Force, the ETF, continues to monitor the monkeypox outbreak in close contact with public bodies, including the ECDC, WHO, and the HERA, and with developers to help make medicines available for preventing and treating monkeypox. Thank you for your attention. I will stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this very comprehensive summary. I will now open the floor to questions from accredited journalists. And at the moment, I don't see any hands. I see, oh yeah, we have one hand. I think it's from Antje Sieb. Antje, the floor is yours. Would you please tell us your affiliation? Thank you. Antje, over to you.
Can I unmute myself, or do you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm from German Radio, and I would like to ask, there are increasing reports about long COVID-like syndromes after vaccination in German long-COVID clinics. And I wanted to know if EMA is looking into this and if there are similar reports from other countries.
Thank you, Antje. I'll ask Dr. Cavalieri to have a go at this. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, the topic of long COVID or post-acute COVID syndrome is an important one, and we are very much aware of the increasing number of cases that have been reported, something that we are really looking into. But what I can say is that for the time being, the few studies that have been conducted and published in the scientific literature would hint to the fact that overall the vaccines are able to prevent long COVID. And therefore, the data that we have so far would be rather reassuring in terms of the ability of the vaccines not only to prevent from symptomatic disease or severe disease, but also to prevent the long-term consequences of this virus. Of course, we will continue to look into emerging evidence to see if there is any signal that any of these events could also be linked to specific vaccination.
Thank you, Marco. Then I see we have a question from Ludwig Burger from Reuters. Ludwig, please, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. I might have missed this in the beginning, but just wanted you to maybe address specifically the recommendation by the FDA to make vaccines based on BA.5. I understand you haven't made that commitment. You're open. I just wanted to understand the logic there. Wouldn't it be beneficial for global vaccine makers to all adhere to one production regime and produce globally one vaccine? And also how you would justify the use of mRNA vaccine based on the BA.1 variant, while BA.5 and 4 are clearly the prevalent ones right now. So maybe you can address that specifically. Thank you.
Thanks, Ludwig. I would like to ask Dr. Cavalieri to set out again the European position on our approach thing.
Yeah, as said in our introduction, we are very much open to consider different composition. As said, we got also beta variant vaccine that are under development, and we don't see why we should exclude them from a potential use if they really demonstrate their ability to neutralize the variant of concern that are in circulation, including BA4 and 5. Also, let's not forget that we are very much open to discuss vaccine based on BA4-5, but this is a brand new line of development that really started recently. So we have to consider also by when such vaccine could be made available, which might be a little bit late in terms of the plans from some member states for their vaccination campaigns in the fall. That's why for the time being, we still think that it's very good to keep all options open and to not exclude any of these candidates from any potential approval. Of course, we are in continued dialogue with manufacturers, but also with international regulators, including the FDA, to understand what might be the best option, because, of course, we would agree that alignment on a reduced number of different vaccine formulations would be overall preferable.
Thanks, Marco. Now we have a question from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen, please.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you. At the start of your discussion, Marco, you told us about the recommendation from the EMA and ECDC earlier this year to offer second boosters to vulnerable people, and now it would be necessary for the next bracket down. Some EU countries have got delays in offering further boosters to vulnerable people because this is not in the marketing authorization label. Will there be plans to update these labels to allow these policies to be brought out more quickly? And then a second question on the monkeypox vaccine. You mentioned the emergency use would be allowed for imported vaccine. Are you referring just simply to the US version of Imvanex, Jynneos, and would that just be from the US? Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Let's start with the COVID-19 question first. That goes to Marco. So this is about plans to update the label for a second booster.
Yeah, of course, as you said, they are not yet, the use of a fourth dose is not yet included in the summary of product characteristics or in the product information of these products. And we are waiting now for the submission from the companies of all this data. But in the meanwhile, we already made this recommendation in April in order really to help member states in taking a decision for using these additional booster doses. And we are now considering also making additional statement together with the ECDC in order to support the use of a second booster dose in the current context with the spread of BA5 on the continent. With respect to your second question,
yes, Marco, please go ahead. So that's the Jynneos question.
No, just to say that indeed the recommendation is on the use of Jynneos because this is the vaccine that currently can be made available in the European Union in the vast majority of cases. But of course, you know, the ETF recommendation was also covering the use of Imvanex. So in other words, both Jynneos and Imvanex, where available, can be used also for the prevention of monkeypox.
Thanks, Marco. Now I see we have a question from Martin Schlack from Der Stern. Martin, please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wonder, do you see the option that you're going to authorize a vaccine in the fall against an Omicron strain that is actually not circulating anymore?
Thanks, Martin. I think that's also a question for Dr. Cavalieri. What the predictions for the fall in terms of the epidemiological situation?
I think the problem is that nobody can predict what will be circulating in the fall, and maybe BA5 is not circulating anymore. Then what are we going to do? So here we should be extremely careful in not thinking about chasing the virus continuously and thinking that we can be ready with a vaccine composition that is exactly matching what will be in circulation in the future. That is simply impossible. And that's why we should have an open mind and look at all these different constructs, see what kind of immune response they are providing, and considering whether they can be adequate anyway in terms of giving a broad coverage or whatever strains will be come out as offspring from these Omicron subvariants.
Thank you, Marco. And I see currently no further hands, I believe. I think we have a second question from Antje Sieb from, sorry, Antje, over to you again, please.
German radio it was.
German radio, thank you.
I just wanted to rephrase my earlier question because I'm afraid it hasn't come across correctly. What I meant was reports about a long COVID-like syndrome after vaccination as a side effect of vaccination, not after an infection after vaccination. So I wanted to know if EMA could say anything about this, if there are other reports from other countries, or if EMA is looking into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Antje. Now this question goes to Dr. Genov. Dr. Genov, please.
Thank you. I would still say that the response that Marco gave is relevant to consider the overall context. Vaccination would help to prevent a long COVID caused by the COVID infection. We don't have at this stage any evidence to suggest that a vaccination would lead to a long COVID. And long COVID is consists of multiple syndromes and multiple clinical events. So it is not a simple entity to get hold on, but we monitor closely and we don't have any concerns or any evidence that that could be the case at this stage. And we have a very extensive experience with COVID-19 vaccines. Just as a reminder, we have only with Comirnaty, we have close to 600 million doses administered. So this is a wealth of information we have, and no sign to your question at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. The next question is from Elena Duse from La Repubblica. Elena, please.
Thank you. I wonder if we have any update on the vaccines for small babies. I mean, 6 months, 5 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena. I think, Marco, you can answer that.
Yeah, indeed. As you know, we are already evaluating a submission for Spivak, so the Moderna vaccine, and we really hope to come up pretty soon with the conclusion of that evaluation, but we can predict that will be after the summer break. At the same time, also for Pfizer-BioNTech, we are starting right now an assessment of their data, and similarly, we should be able to come up with an opinion at the beginning of the fall.
Thanks, Marco. Then we have a follow-up question from Ludwig Burger from Reuters. Ludwig, please.
Thanks for letting me follow up. I just wanted to maybe address the potential problem when global drug makers like Moderna or BioNTech Pfizer would have to kind of split their production into 2 large batches, one adhering to FDA guidance and the other adhering to EMA guidance, whether there are any problems that you see are associated with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ludwig. I would like to ask our Chief Medical Officer, Stefan Tierstrup, to respond to that.
Yeah, many thanks for that question. We are in contact with the manufacturers, and so far that concerned, I think the feedback we have so far is that they would be able to have 2 manufacturing lines going in parallel with 2 different strains. But of course, I agree with you also in terms of security to the market. It would be preferable that we aim at the same. But coming back to where Dr. Cavalieri was, we are still holding over all potential opportunities open here in Europe to see what will fit best for the autumn.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. And then we have another question from Martin Schlag from Der Stern. Martin, please.
Yes, thank you for letting me ask another question. I just wondered, and Dr. Cavalieri, you briefly talked about the clinical studies that are necessary for adapted vaccines to be approved. And I think you mentioned that in the future, we might find a way to approve them similar to what we do with influenza vaccines. But I also understood that for this year, still data from clinical studies is necessary. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what kind of data you exactly need? Do you need efficacy data, or do you need just data from antibody titers, for example? Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And over to Marco to describe our current thinking with relation to data requirements.
Yeah, indeed. So this is something that has been agreed also with the FDA at the beginning of this year, is that we would still like to see these clinical trial data, at least for the first investigational adaptive vaccines, in order to understand the reactogenicity and the immunogenicity. So these studies have been designed in order to look at the immune response that is elicited by this updated vaccine, and to see particularly that they are better than the current one in terms of neutralization of Omicron. At the beginning, we were talking about Omicron BA1. Now, of course, things are moving as the virus is moving, and it's always very difficult to keep the pace of the virus, I have to admit, but it would be relevant to have also data on neutralization with the currently circulating variants. So it would be important to see if these adaptive vaccines, including the BA1 vaccines, are able to neutralize BA4 and 5, and to what extent, because this is extremely useful information. Now, in terms of the framework, of course, we are looking into moving towards the influenza framework, also because of a time factor, but because at the same time we are learning a lot about these vaccines, and we will be able to predict what will be the immunogenicity and safety of additional adaptation. And just to say that in the context of the vaccines, including BA4 and 5, we will be discussing what can be done and whether this can be already considered at this stage or whether it's premature.
Thank you very much, Marco. And that brings us to the end of our press briefing. Thanks so much for your excellent questions this afternoon and for attending our press briefing. A big thank you to all our speakers. As always, if you have any further questions, please do contact the EMA press office. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you and goodbye.